Bibliophiles of the internet, today, as promised, I'm here to give you 5 reasons to read the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. Listen, if you're anything like me, you don't need 5 reasons. You don't even need 1 reason beyond this is a book that's going to exist. And I get it. I respect it. I'm just here to do my job and confirm why reading this book should be a very, very easy choice. I'm going to start with a synopsis. Full disclosure, I have not found like a cute, snappy, concise way to summarize this story yet, so stick with me on this one and just trust the process. So the Sunbearer Trials is pitched as being like Percy Jackson with a Mexican pantheon of gods meets the Hunger Games. The story is set in a fantasy world called Reina del Sol, where the creator god Sol sacrificed themselves to power the sun and protect humans from the evil obsidian gods trapped in the stars. Now at the beginning of each decade, the sun's power needs to be replenished so that humans can continue existing safely, and that power is given in the form of a worthy mortal sacrifice. To determine who will be the sacrifice, there is a series of trials known as the Sunbearer Trials, where 10 semidioses compete. The winner gets to be the one who carries light and life to all the temples in the land, and the loser becomes the person who the champion has to sacrifice. Our main character is Theo, a young trans jade semidios, and jades are basically the lowest ranking tier of gods most closely related to humans. He's looking forward to watching his best friend Nia compete in the trials because she is a gold semidios, and historically golds are always chosen as competitors because they are the most powerful and most elite. However, as you might expect, Sol decides to switch things up and chooses 2 non-gold semidioses to compete, Theo being one of them, and now he has no choice but to compete in these life and death trials, hoping against hope that he somehow survives. Content warnings for some thematic violence, references to parental death, child death, and grief, as well as mortal sacrifices, and some brief allusions to child abuse. Diving right in, the first reason why you should read the Sunbearer Trials may be a somewhat obvious talking point, but it's absolutely worth exploring, and that is for the incredible cast of characters themselves. If you've read Cemetery Boys, you know that Aiden is very adept at crafting side characters who threaten to steal the spotlight, and they have really outdone themselves in this one, especially because this kind of story necessitates a very large cast. I say this is a somewhat obvious talking point because even if you haven't read the book yet, chances are you are somewhat familiar with these characters because of the marketing campaign with the trading cards. You know their names, their pronouns, their elements, their styles, their strengths and weaknesses, but what's really great is that all these characters get the chance to shine and make this story what it really is. It is not easy to juggle a bunch of different characters to make them all feel vibrant and distinctive and make sure that no one gets lost as the story progresses, but this book is beautifully able to balance all of those things. I love that all these characters are memorable in their own right, and having such a big cast of characters just makes things fun, makes things interesting, allows a lot more opportunity for character growth and conflict, especially because all these characters have such different personalities and journeys. Having all these different characters also introduces an element of almost mysteriousness, because you can never guess what they're going to do next. You don't know how they're strategizing behind the scenes. You never know how they're going to approach each new challenge. And that's exciting because there's as many ways of conquering these trials as there are characters. And honestly, it's just fun to read about these characters. They all have such big personalities, they're funny in their own ways. Even though there's such high stakes and high tension throughout the story, you will definitely find yourself laughing out loud at some point because at the end of the day, these characters really are just kids. They've been unwillingly conscripted into these circumstances where they have to compete against each other, and some of them may have been forced to become very vicious competitors, but even though they're expected to perform within these very specific constraints, they're still their own people, and I feel like the story really respects that. My second reason to read this book is once again a very broad topic, but still very much worth getting into, and that is the world building. The world of this story is very much a character within its own right. If you really tried to force my hand and get me to describe the experience of reading the Sunbearer Trials in one concise phrase, I would tell you hands down that this book is a feast for the senses. There's so much rich information to take in about this world on literally every single page. The world is so lovingly steeped in Mexican culture and history that it's impossible to miss the sense of warmth and depth that comes with that attention to detail. It is very much center stage. This story allows you to experience the wonder of this world through the characters' eyes as the story unfolds. One of the really exciting aspects of the trials is that each challenge takes place in a different host city across the Reina del Sol, so the characters are kind of touring all these different cities as the story progresses. And what's really cool is that even though the characters are united under this umbrella of their sun god and their various deities, each city very much has its own culture, its own history, its own distinctive architecture and food and belief system and system of values. They are not monolithic, so the reader is constantly being able to access all these different ideas and visuals and landscapes that very much engage engage all the senses and give each part of this story such a distinctive and grounded sense of place. Also, the deification of so many different marginalizations is going to resonate with so many people because it signals to young readers especially that there is divinity and power in being Latina and being brown and being deaf and being queer and trans and all these different things. Because all the characters are semidioses, that subtext is built into the world, is built into the story without having to be the entire story. You have these divine characters who just happen to be trans or non-binary or disabled, etc. But then because they're also powerful, it really celebrates and uplifts those experiences. Equating all those different experiences with godliness is very powerful, and I think it's going to give so many people permission to just be themselves. Like, there's a non-plot related scene where Theo is just doing his tee shot, and it's such a simple, inconsequential moment. But there's definitely going to be people who read that and think, wow, I do that too. And being able to see characters who are like cool and cunning and literally full of magic just existing in a way that's realistic is going to cast those same experiences in a completely new light for so many folks. The experience of this world is fully immersive. It's so clearly inspired by Mexican culture and draws from that, but it very much stands on its own, and all the really cool details piece together something that's new and exciting to read about. There are so many layers to excavate in this world, and I think that's something that really makes the story stand out. Reason number 3 is because the competition aspect of the story by design has so many twists and turns that you cannot predict. Obviously, I'm not going to go into great detail about what the trials are because I think that element of discovery is a big part of what makes reading this story so much fun, and everyone should be able to fully take that in for themselves. As I've mentioned before, a big comp title for this book is The Hunger Games, which tracks because it's another action-packed YA book about kids being chosen to compete in life and death games for the quote-unquote betterment of society. As a comparison, it makes sense, but I still say this book is for the weebs. It's for anyone who's watched a show in an anime and gotten super hyped up when a big competition arc begins. It's for those of us who get chills thinking about the UA Sports Festival, Greed Island, the Chunin exams, literally any sports anime that has any kind of tournament. That is very much the vibe. I truly think this story takes inspiration from all those places, and what's so great about all those classic shonen tournament arcs is that they start out in a way that seems formulaic, but there's always a twist. Again, I'm not revealing anything here, but I appreciate how much thought has been put into how the actual trials themselves work. To go back to that comparison of the Hunger Games, I think there's actually a huge difference between that story and this one, which is that competitors are actively killed off throughout the Hunger Games, which creates very different stakes. Some people might argue that the Hunger Games are more intense because of that, because the possibility of death or violence is constantly looming over the characters, and obviously that presents a sense of finality that heightens the character's sense of mortality, which is painfully finite. The Sunbearer Trials takes a very different approach in that the trial rankings are cumulative rather than solidified on a round-by-round basis, which I actually think makes it much more exciting and interesting because nothing is ever quite set in stone. While it would be shocking to see characters constantly being killed, I think this way of doing the trials actually makes for much more compelling stakes because everyone is constantly 100% in the game throughout the entire process, which also means that everyone is constantly at risk. If characters are dying as the story goes on, that would be the end of their story. They would no longer be contributing to the games. The pool of competitors would get smaller and smaller, which would motivate the surviving characters, but then the possible outcomes would also significantly diminish with each loss. The threat of being sacrificed is still looming over all the characters throughout the entire process. There's still a sense of desperation as different characters take their turns at both the top and bottom of the ranks, but it's almost more exciting and unpredictable because you can never truly count out any of the characters. Something else that makes this story stand out compared to other stories that have life and death games is that many of those other stories depend on outright brutality to establish high stakes, and this story is able to establish its own high stakes without having to solely depend on violence. That's not to say the characters don't fight or don't get physical or don't endanger each other with their magical powers, because they definitely do all those things, but the trials themselves, by nature, are much more complex. The trials are not all about power and brute strength. The characters cannot physically fight their way into the top ranks no matter how hard they try. The trials themselves are designed to test other things like creative thinking, problem solving, decision making, sometimes teamwork, all of which are not only encouraged but rewarded in their own ways. Again, because there are so many moving pieces and so many different and valid ways to approach each challenge, that not only validates all the characters' different strengths and perspectives, but it keeps you guessing at what's going to happen next. Now we're getting into themes, baby, because reason number 4 is that this story understands the importance of getting into some good trouble and being that wrench in the system. Theo is a chaotic little troublemaker. He does not like following the rules, and honestly, Why would he? He spent his entire life being subjected to this weirdly stratified system of semidioses where his worth and future have been predetermined by his power or perceived lack thereof. He lives in a society where it's considered an honor for kids to die for the benefit of everyone else. All things considered, the rules and the way things work objectively sucks, and in so many ways he's an unwilling participant in this whole system. He doesn't want to uphold it, but he also feels powerless to stop it. His knack for challenging authority is something he takes with him into the trials. He's constantly testing the boundaries of what's allowed or expected. On principle, and most likely out of spite, he never takes the straightforward, easy path in any of the trials. Theo is also constantly questioning why things have to be the way they are. He's always gut-checking everyone else, like, are we just cool with someone dying at the end of this because that's the way things have always been? Because that doesn't really seem like a good enough reason. In so many ways, Theo represents an unwelcome disruption in how this entire system works. Not only is he not expected to be a real contender as a Jade Semidios, but like I said, he's not really interested in following the rules. He's not bound to the trials in the same way that the Golds are, especially because they've explicitly been trained for exactly this and only this. At the end of the day, this story understands that people who are willing to start some trouble, ask some questions, defy some boundaries, dare to exist and think in ways that are not often accepted or embraced, are the ones who can effect true and meaningful change. There will always be danger in following or investing in any kind of system without question, especially the kinds that actively harm or attempt to isolate the most vulnerable among us. And Theo is definitely not afraid to start poking all kinds of holes in the status quo, even if it means defying the gods. And that kind of leads into my fifth and final reason why you should read the Sunbearer Trials, which is because it's ultimately a story that celebrates the power of collectivism over the value of individuals. To go back to the point of challenging deeply ingrained systems, the Sunbearer Trials, much like any other kind of fictional deathmatch, function in a way that motivates the competitors to fight their way towards the top, if only so that they don't become the sacrifice. Not being killed, of course, is a great motivator, but on a broader scale, this is a system that expects its participants to prioritize and privilege their own ranking, their own well-being, their own honor, their own life over 9 other people, and depending on how they conduct themselves, they could be rewarded for that choice. I think that gaming structure really speaks to the cultural perspective that's especially prevalent in Western society, most notoriously here in the United States, where the focus is on individualism and exceptionalism over everyone and everything else. That basically means that culturally there's so much value placed on the individual. People are conditioned and rewarded for prizing their own worth, status, safety, success, happiness over everyone else's. The idea being as long as you take care of yourself, you're gonna be okay and nothing else matters. In combination with capitalism especially, which operates on a similar reward system, that's why we produce the most billionaires in the world, which is definitely not something to brag about, but it reinforces that idea that the value of the individual supersedes literally everything else. Again, that's the kind of mindset that's encouraged in the Sunbearer Trials, because at the very least, the semidioses should actively be trying to avoid death. But really, it's a lose-lose system at either end, because if you're the worst ranked person, you die, and if you're the top ranked person, you're bestowed with this divine honor, but you also have to do the sacrificing parts. As Theo points out, it's a very bad, very flawed system that kind of sucks, so the question becomes how can he work around it even though he has no choice but to contribute to it? The solution is that he doesn't give importance to his own rank. He doesn't want to be last place for obvious reasons, but he's also not actively trying to secure a higher place. Theo is much more interested in helping the people he cares about and creating these alliances so that none of them get left behind, which is a collectivist mindset. And I think what's cool about it is that some of those alliances are consistent and some are situational. So it's not like Theo is only reserving his help for a set number of people, but he's judging whether he and someone else can help each other on a case-by-case basis. I think that sends a really strong message about how the most disruptive and most powerful thing we can do is care about other people and help the people around us. Though we might be trapped within these cyclical, destructive, harmful systems, we can still beat them by finding support in community, which is a transformative, lasting kind of love and support. Community is what endures over everything else, and stories like this remind us that our goal should not just be to survive these oppressive systems, but help as many people who are in our power to help. That is how we move the needle, that is how we restore hope, that is how we make a difference. I'm gonna stop myself there because I don't want to say anything else. I have held back a tremendous amount in this video because I firmly believe that so much of the story should be experienced firsthand, and I'm really trying to preserve that for all of you in whatever way I can, so please applaud for my restraints. If we're mutuals and you want to yell about it, my DMs are open to you, but otherwise I hope this video has convinced you to read this wonderful, wonderful book, and whether you've read it yourself or if you plan to, please feel free to stop by the comments and let me know what you think. But that is everything I have for this review/recommendation today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.